Good morning, members, and welcome to the Caucus of the Whole to discuss the budget, the Education Transformation Bill, the Yield Bill, and the Miscellaneous Tax Bill. Members, at this time, we are printing more copies of all the materials that will be placed on the table if you have not gotten them, so stay tuned for those copies coming in. So we will start this Caucus of the Whole with an update on the budget, and I'll turn it over to Representative Shai.
Good morning, everyone. After we're done, we'll have some highlight sheets to have you there hot off the press, so I'm just reading from the first copy. A lot of people were here late last night for various committees of conference, and we were some of them, so I'm glad to be upright and looking at you all this morning. At 8 o'clock last night, the House and Senate agreed to the budget, and the joint fiscal crack team, who said it might be many hours before everything would be put together for us to sign, turned the budget around in 3 hours. And we were able to sign it at 11 o'clock last night. It was unanimous on the House and the Senate, which was great. I had a great team on the Committee of Conference. Representative Feltus and Representative Bloomley were on my team, so I want to thank them and my whole committee, because they helped get us where we are today with this budget. So, and the Joint Fiscal Office, with whom we couldn't do any of this. So lots of gratitude all around. The budget, as proposed in H 951 and agreed to by both bodies, represents about a 2.88% increase compared to fiscal year 26. And the total appropriations from all funds are about unduplicated, or about 2.1% change. There were a couple of things that happened while the Committee of Conference was meeting that made this number be a little higher than it was when we were first talking, and some of you may have heard about some of these things. The first was that our wonderful treasurer met with a few of us and said that they had found more money in unclaimed property than they were expecting to have in the budget for either fiscal year 26 or 27. And between those 2 years, they had just over $10 million more that they could give to us. And that's what made the difference for us to be able to appropriate $12 million to UVM for their multi-complex facility that they had requested. They came to the governor and requested 20. The governor put in 15, and the Senate did 12, and we were able to find 12, and it's not all coming out of the Higher Ed Education Trust Fund, which was the concern that we had in this body, that scholarships for Vermonters would be affected. So they're not being affected. We're taking $2 million from the Higher Ed Trust Fund and $10 million from the unclaimed property to get to the $12 million. The $2 million is an allowable use of unclaimed of the Higher Ed Trust Fund. It can be used for scholarships or capital projects. But $2 million is a small percentage of a bigger capital project, and they've raised a lot of funds. So it fits within the parameters to do $2 million. It would not have fit within to do $12 million. So that money is going to UVM. And in addition, we had language in there about SNAP and Medicaid. As you all know, the federal government has made significant changes to both programs, and we're finding that many Vermonters across the state, the SNAP changes have already gone into effect, and we've lost many hundreds of Vermonters off that program because the requirements have changed. People don't always know what's happening. They have to resubmit information on a more regular basis. Work requirements are involved, all those kinds of things. And then Medicaid is going into effect in January, and there's additional worry that Vermonters in all of our areas are going to be losing out on benefits that they are entitled to. So there had been a proposal earlier on in the session that we weren't able to address, but we were able to address through the budget to take $3.5 million from the $30 million we had reserved last year for federal funds issues. I don't know if you remember back to last year's budget, and use that to support community organizations with AHS, Hunger Free Vermont, the Office of the Healthcare Advocate, and community organizations and partners across the state to build capacity to support Vermonters across the state and find them where they are and help them get the benefits that they need. So we're excited that we were able to do that. Neither of those two were part of the original general fund construct that we had, so it's new money that we were able to use. So in terms of other highlights in base appropriations, some of this you've heard before, but we've made some minor changes. Primary care continues to be a serious issue, as we know, healthcare costs and finding primary care physicians. We are providing money to offer loan repayment to primary care providers and primary care provider placement services within Vermont. We have money, again, for the free and referral clinics. The Senate came up with a construct to increase payments to primary care providers who used to get payments from the Accountable Care Organization. That went away, and we were able to find some funding to continue to support our primary care providers, which is pretty important. We have brought back, the Senate had taken out money for 211, and we put that money back in. We also added money back that the Senate had taken out to fully fund at our requested amount Meals on Wheels and the global commitment money that's associated with that. We, in total, with food, with Meals on Wheels and NOFA and Vermonters, Feeding Vermonters in the food bank, it's a little over 1.4 million that we were able to give to all these organizations. We also have money in here. We had it in our original budget. The source of funds is a little bit different, but a reminder for the Northeast Kingdom communities that were affected by the 2025 flooding event that weren't able to get FEMA. We're able to fund it so those towns will get some funding to help them with that. The Rental Arrears Assistance Fund is still in there for housing. The Permanent Classified Disabilities Housing Coordinator that we had put in, the Senate was able to keep in. We added back some positions that the Senate, that we thought were important, the Senate had taken out. We were able to put them back in. That includes a mediator at the Labor Relations Board, a full-time staff attorney at the Ethics Commission to be able to do the municipal work that we require them to do, but they can't do it because we didn't have a position for it, and they'll be doing other things. There's a flood safety position. We had done the immigration attorney for Vermont Legal Aid. We also had money for the Vermont Legal Aid Helpline, which has more than doubled the number of calls from about 11,000 to 22,000 for people who need help with housing and discrimination and lots of other things that our Human Rights Commission can't do because HUD, Housing and Urban Development, has stopped doing contracts with them. So there's a ripple effect all over the place, and we're trying to support them where we can. Let's see. We also, we were able to find, at the end of the day, we were able to find $700,000 that the Agency of Education had forgotten to budget for the Read Vermont program, and that is now in the budget. There's also money for related to the education transformation. I think that's about, I'm not finding the right number here, around $1.5 million. Can you remember what that was? Education transformation? Yeah, at one point I thought it was around $1.5 million. Anyway, we have money to cover what's happening in the education budget. When you hear about it, it's all covered, accounted for in the budget. So we also have money to support a rural industrial development program that provides grants to support businesses and expansion efforts. And part of the language that's in there, the House Commerce Committee put together language related to an allowable use being for federally affected properties. So if it was a flood or if it had anything to do with EB5 and it might be in receivership, things like that, we have the funding in there for those projects that have been long stalled to actually move forward. So those are kind of the highlights of things. If there's anything in particular that you want to know about, we will put a highlight sheet down here, and the web report, which is the thing that has all the numbers, there were some tweaks being made to it, and it will be on the Joint Fiscal Office website, and we can also let you know when that is and send a link to it when it's up and running. So I'll take any questions if people have any. And if you think, go ahead. Troy? Oh, I don't know how to do that.
I want to go all the way back to the funding for the UVM project. Can you explain, you said it very quickly, but the $2 million that is coming out of scholarship funds now is within the parameters of how we spend that on capital? Is that accurate?
The Vermont Higher Ed Endowment Trust Fund can be used for two purposes. One is for scholarships, and there's a formula that's done, and that goes to VSAC, the Vermont State University, and UVM. And the other is for capital projects. And I don't have the language right here in front of me to tell you, but what I remember is that it has to be a small percentage of a larger, they won't fund the whole capital project, and there has to be a lot of fundraising and contributions for it to happen. In the case of this project, they've already raised, I'm going to get my numbers wrong, 101 million. They've raised a lot of money already, and there's money more to be raised. Another 50 million, I think they have to raise in addition to our 12. So in terms of a percentage of the whole project and a percentage of money raised, they'd be well within those parameters. Okay? Great. And if you all think of other questions later, this is a lot to absorb, feel free to catch any one of us on the Committee of Conference, Representative Feltus or Representative Bloomley. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Representative Shai. Next up, we'll talk about House Bill 955, our Education Transformation Bill, and I will turn it over to our Chair of Education.
Good morning, everybody. Like Representative Shai, many of us were here last night signing the Committee of Conference report on H 955. You'll see the Committee of Conference report in the calendar is fairly brief, and that really represents some pretty significant broad agreement among the House and the Senate on H 955. Really, much of what the Senate proposed and was really to add clarity to processes. It fleshed out areas that we hoped they would flesh out, like school construction aid, and filled in some gaps, such as making sure no district would be left behind in the merger process, and also making sure that our CTE centers are all part of the conversation as that goes forward. 955, as you recall, really has several significant parts. There is the merger process, the voluntary merger process. There is significant tax language in there, and then there's a lot of language on school construction. But I think suffice to say that the Senate kept the framework that we had created for community-driven merger committees, as well as the creation of shared service agencies. These, other than maybe a few tweaks here and there, remain largely the same as they came back from the Senate. Again, they, throughout there, you'll see that they added clarifying language. They added some processes that I think are additive to the bill and making it better. Of course, the significant change is the moving up of the implementation of the foundation formula from what was proposed by the House in H 955 back to what is originally in Act 73, which is FY 30. And as part of that, it moves up the date on potential mergers from November 2028 to March 2028, which does make the schedule more ambitious, but still doable. So that's really one of the reasons you'll see that this report is relatively short. It looks like we acceded to many of the Senate positions, but the fact is that many of the Senate positions were our positions, just fleshed out and approved upon. I'm going to turn it over to Representative Kornheiser to talk a bit more about the school construction and the tax portions of the bill.
Hi, Emily Kornheiser from Brattleboro. So as we know, in order to fully realize the intentions around 955 and Act 73 last year, and to really have this meaningful, community-driven school governance changes move forward effectively and make sure that kids' needs are met wherever they live in the state, we need to make sure that districts can accommodate any changes in how buildings are structured, whether that means regionalizing a high school or moving grades around between elementary schools, or really just, making sure that health and safety needs are met, which they certainly are not in many areas of our state with their school buildings. And so the comprehensive school construction program that we passed out of the House however many months ago in 955 essentially stayed intact over in the Senate. However, they did, frankly, we don't often talk very much in this chamber about the great work that the Senate does. And I will say that the Senate did really great work to build on our great work in the school construction program. They filled in a lot of holes in necessary ballot language, procedures, timelines, how the capital stack would be structured, and the legislation really benefited from that work. We acceded on all of that. It was really just like sort of the next step in the work. They clarified some language around whether the CDAC was responsible for something or the treasurer. That was very necessary. They continued our constructs around school construction being funded if it meets very certain criteria that aligns with the goals of Act 73 and 955. And they kept the idea that school districts will be operating under a capital stack that includes coverage for legacy debt, coverage from state level bonding in the form of a grant, coverage for, and then local bonding, and the debt service on that local bonding is covered by a combination of supplemental, of funds coming from the state to cover that, and then supplemental district spending that is raised locally. And the Senate did some great work about making sure that the votes on that would work well. We did, so we acceded to their position on that for the great work that they carried forward. They did make some changes to the ratios of how debt was carried and how much was carried by the state, how much was carried locally. And given that this is an enormous step forward from a non-existent school construction program and a significant step forward from the school construction program that we had in statute a number of years ago, we decided to stick to their slightly more conservative ratios in order to make sure that the state's needs continue to be met and we have the time that we need with school construction division at AOE that there is full funding for and new positions for in the budget, as Representative Shai referenced, to really take the next steps to complete that program. And so really great collaboration between the House and Senate, making sure that that school construction program will work for all of our districts. The tax work that we did in Act 73 and then carried over into H955, fortunately, we are moving that up a year or sticking to the original timeline of Act 73. That means that by acceding to the Senate's position on that timeline, we can have really great changes to our property tax exemption system happen a year sooner. That means that folks whose properties get appraised at a higher level will not really be, will still be eligible for property tax credits. It means that we will significantly simplify our property tax credit program, and the majority of Vermont homesteads will see actually an increased homestead property tax credit. It also, they essentially accepted the vast majority of our language with regards to how the new second home tax works, after really the careful work of Ways and Means that you've already heard about to really say what is a homestead, what isn't a homestead, what would be considered a second home. They accepted the vast majority of that work, as well as our work to move forward the regional assessment district structure, which will allow us to have consistency in our grand lists across the state and realize a dream of some of the nerdier folks among us to continue to reduce the impacts of the common level of appraisal, which confuses constituents and humans everywhere. And so that is the tax work that is contained in the bill as a collaboration between the two bodies. Overall, I think we have come to some remarkable agreements over the course of the last 2 years to carry forward this work to make sure that Vermont kids' needs are going to be met. Wherever they live in the state, they will have access to quality education. The work is not finished. We have a lot more to do next year. The bill calls for multiple reports, and I hope everyone that is here, and actually everyone who is not returning, will read those reports when they come in December, because we still have many decisions to make in the coming years, and the contingencies in the bill do reflect the future work that needs to be done next year and the year after. I think with that, I will stop. Is there anything that I left out there?
I know.
Okay, great.
Questions?
Any questions? Okay, great, thanks. We're here and around and very available now that we're not in room 10.
Yeah, please feel free to seek us out if you have questions between now and later when this comes to the floor. Happy to answer them.
All right, thank you, Representative Conlon and Representative Kornheiser. Next, we will talk about the yield bill, and Representative Kimball will lead that. Thank you.
Good morning. Exciting time to talk about the yield bill. Usually it's not a controversial bill that we need something in the well of the House. This year, a little different. First, just please help me acknowledge the tireless work of the staff from Joint Fiscal Office and Ledge Council in all three of these bills. Thank you very much. Thank you. So H949, the yield bill, is an act relating to homestead property tax yields, the non-homestead property tax rate, and the technical changes to education finance. So basically, what does this bill do? It uses $104.9 million from the general fund all in 1 year instead of 2 as the House proposed, but $100.9 million to reduce the amount to be raised by property taxes, reducing the average increase in property taxes to 3.5%. compared to the 7% first indicated in December. There's a $4 million 1-year increase in the renter credit, which increases the maximum credit to $3,250 from $2,500, and the amount of the credit equal to 12.5% of the market rent from the current 10%. This is a 1-year credit. It says the property dollar equivalent yield at $9,401, the income dollar equivalent yield at $12,960, and the non-homestead property tax rate at $1.643 per $100. It increases the circuit breaker income limit in which property tax owners receive a credit towards municipal and education property taxes from $47,000 to $50,000. This increases the amount of the municipal credit to $2,600 and the education property tax credit to $6,000, helping those property owners that are struggling to pay their municipal and education property taxes and earning less than $50,000. It implements the education cost measures by reducing the current excess spending threshold and provides a path to the foundation formula and the education opportunity payment. It creates a ramp from the current 118% of the fiscal year 25 average per pupil expense, adjusted for inflation, by going to 115% of 15.5% in fiscal year 28, which is July 1st, 2027. Remember, it does not affect the next school year, which begins July 1st, 2026. And then dropping to 114.5% in fiscal year 29, 113.5% in fiscal year 30, and getting down to 112.5%. We envision in this bill that we will not get to that lower amount because we will embrace the foundation formula in fiscal year 30 or in July 1st of 2029. It also restricts increases in the tuition rates charged by receiving schools, both public and private, to the prior year's increase in overall state education spending. That increase this year was 3.8% from the previous year. So in a nutshell, that is really the major things that it does, and also extends the date for which school bond construction will not be counted towards excess spending threshold calculations to July 1st, 2026. So here are the good things about it. It limits the increases in the property taxes in fiscal year 2027 to 3.5% from the original projection of 7%. It creates a slope in the lowering of the excess spending threshold to reduce education expenses in a more measured way than had been proposed to us. And it provides a bridge to the foundation formula in adjusting education expenses. It gives low-income property owners greater assistance by increasing the limits for the circuit breaker tax credit, and provides low-income renters with a larger credit during this time of inflation where wages are not keeping up with the cost of rent. And it limits the tuition increases to provide sending school districts with some cost containment measures. You will find on the table, and many of you already have, the fiscal notes, the education outlook, and a spreadsheet that shows the 115.5% reduction in the excess spending threshold, and you can see where the school districts across the state are. One is being prepared, is not yet ready. It was a late night to go down to the 114.5%, and on, so on and so on. So you can see the long-term effects there. And I have to tell you that the body across the way is already in favor of this, and we'll be seeing this bill soon this afternoon. Ready to take any questions you have about the yield bill. Yes, Representative Campbell.
Representative Kimball, thank you for this. Could you explain this this spreadsheet a little bit, what these columns mean?
Impossible.
That's what I thought.
Yes. So, and I might phone a friend from the Joint Fiscal Office who prepared it, but I think one thing is important to look at is in the top part of the sheet on the right-hand side, where you're looking at current law and the boxes for current law and the H949 Committee of Conference construct for fiscal year 28. In that box, you can find a couple of different things. One is the excess spending threshold at 118%, and that is $16,470. And in the box next to it, the excess spending threshold at 15.5%, and that's at $16,121. Remember, this is using long-term weighted average daily membership. And it also assumes, does not assume what FY28 expenses are. This is assuming that that threshold is applied to the FY27, which is starting on July 1st, 2026, at current approved budget rates with the current excess spending threshold, if that makes sense to you. So we're not assuming any increases for fiscal year 28 in that number. The total count of districts over the threshold currently in the construct with 118% is 8, of which my school is 1. And you'll find that on the very last page. And the total count of districts over the threshold is 13, given the 115.5%. So an increase in 5 additional districts that are going to fall subject to the excess spending threshold. In the other columns, you'll find the county as assigned by the Agency of Education, where you can look at the county and then find the specific school district underneath school district. Their estimated FY27 education spending, some of these budgets, most of them have been approved. There's only a couple that are outstanding from what I understand. And that is the actual education spending for those districts. The estimated FY27 excess spending exclusions and how much is being excluded from the excess spending threshold applies to those construction bonds that were taken out prior to July 1st, 2024, not reflecting the July 1st, 2026, which is currently in the yield bill and its current construct. So this does not show the additional amounts that may be excluded. So the FY27 long-term weighted average daily membership, these are the weighted students within that school district. The actual number of bodies is going to be different. I think all of us are equally as confused on that, so just go with me for a minute. And then the FY27 ed spending per long-term weighted is really dividing the education spending by the long-term weighted average daily membership. So that gives you what your long-term weighted average daily membership per pupil spending is in order to compare it to what that excess spending threshold is. So in that column, you can compare that to where that excess spending threshold is for 2027 at $16,470. And then in the next column, so you'll see that at 118% threshold, the estimated excess spending per long-term weighted average daily membership is the actual dollar amount. And then at 118% threshold, the total estimated excess spending for fiscal year 27. So it's either per student or total spending, if that makes sense. And then the same columns for the 115 apply. So you can see the dollar amount per student that is over the excess spending threshold. So on this first page, you'll see Danville, just to call out where you'll see a number that they're falling into the excess spending threshold, is they are at $1 per student, long-term weighted average daily membership right now, per pupil spending, but a total of $493. And the following year is $349 for a total of $175,000 at 115.5. I hope that explains that. I'm sure Joint Fiscal Office would be happy to go through more of the details there. Yes.
And you may have said this, and I may have missed it, but can you remind us what happens when a district is over the excess spending threshold?
Yes. So we have a wonderful document on our committee page. It is written by Beth St. James, and it's Excess Spending 101, and explains everything about the calculating the excess spending threshold, because it can be confusing. But let's take some simple numbers. If you determine the excess spending threshold by using fiscal year 2025 average education spending adjusted for inflation, which is NIPA, which is the national, just a minute, I don't need help with this, I got it, which is the National Income and Product Accounts Implicit Price Deflator. So that is an index that we use currently to calculate what that excess spending threshold is. Joint Fiscal Office is going to be doing a study. They had wanted to do it before the session began, couldn't get to it with everything that's going on, so we'll be looking at that next year. So that 2025 is inflated to what our current year is. And then from there, that represents the average, and then you add 118%. You multiply that by 118%, and that is your excess spending threshold. If your school district, let's say that number is $10,000, just for sake of simplicity. If your school district spends $12,000, then that means you are $2,000 over the excess spending threshold. What it means is that that $2,000 is an added back into what the calculation is for the purpose of calculating the excess spending threshold. So it's $14,000, and that's what your local school district tax rate is calculated using. It's it's not on the full 10,000, it's on that 2,000 plus the 2,000. So it is a real disincentive to spend more money. School districts follow this closely, some very aggressively, to get underneath that excess spending threshold. And it's not easy. It is not easy. Does that explain your question, Representative Arsenault? Yes. Representative Olson.
Yeah, thanks very much. Good explanation. I very much appreciate the spreadsheet. Gives us a good picture, I think, of what might happen in our districts for the next school year, budget year. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on, because I understand that the spending threshold is going to be reduced over the next few years. And I know it's probably difficult to make assumptions going out, but I'm wondering if you have a general sense of how the lowering of the excess spending threshold is going to affect there aren't that many districts here that seem to be affected the first year, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the out years, especially when you think about expenses that are either in their control and a lot that are not in their control.
Thank you for the question. It is very difficult to know. In the past, Joint Fiscal Office has prepared spreadsheets showing that difference at 118, 116, 114, a lot of different percentages, and the Joint Fiscal Office will be preparing that for those different percentages. It cannot anticipate what school boards will be making decisions on, so it can't do that. But it's based on just current levels of education spending.
Right, and I appreciate the difficulty in projecting, but is that information available for those out years?
It will be. It is not, yeah, because it takes time to do that calculation. So 115.5, and I'm looking, when do we think maybe, what's that? Within the hour, I'm told.
There we go.
Yes.
Thanks very much.
Which is magic. Yes. Representative White.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Kimball. So my hope, so on the excess spending threshold, kind of that, this route that the schools are taking and how it will continue to decrease, my hope is that the savings from the CSAs and perhaps some savings from reference-based pricing for teachers will help get the schools prepared for this decrease over the years as we move closer to the foundation formula. Is that an apt assumption?
I would have to say that in conversations with the chair of the Education Committee, that there are already school districts who are talking about how they might be able to cooperate better. Maybe it's a merger, maybe something else. So there could be some efficiencies of scale achieved by that. There's no estimate of how much CSAs would be able to reduce expenses by or anything in this calculation. So there is a whole wide world of possibilities that could affect what the spending is.
Okay, thank you. And I'm wondering, you mentioned the circuit breaker and the renter credit.
Yes.
And you gave some detail, but would you just speak a little bit more broadly, kind of in layman's terms, how exactly those credits work for just the average Vermonter?
Sure. One is the renter credit. Just to give you an example, somebody when they're filing their tax returns fills out an application form that goes to the Department of Taxes in applying for a renter credit. This was a renter rebate a few years ago, and now it's a renter credit. So if they qualify, they've been renting in Vermont for the past year, and they are then given a credit equal to a percentage of the fair market rent for their particular county, and it's by a just area median income for that county. And so they don't have to disclose what their rent is because it's based on their income. And it could be even an apartment where 2 or 3 people share the same building. They are all applying for individual renter credits. So it's been a very successful program and returning some of that money to the low-income Vermonters. That's one place. It's also matched up against a landlord certificate that landlords are required to file, so it's verified. The second piece on the circuit breaker is a calculation of your income and also the maximum you should be paying for municipal property taxes and also education property taxes as a percent. And I believe it's 2% and 3%. Will it help on this? Yeah, let's just go with that. But there is the joint fiscal note has a lot of the details on it. You can find the details in there. Great, thank you. Representative from Derby.
Thank you, member from Woodstock. Excess spending, school budgets. What about schools that have, perhaps one, the member in front of me whose school district has gone out ahead of their PCB issues and bonded for $1 million to do necessary renovations to make their school a safer place, have not been reimbursed, may not be reimbursed, should be reimbursed. But if they've done this and other schools have bonded for millions, 2, 3, 4, 5 million to retrofit their schools to bring them into 21st century learning. And they're paying through their budget, paying back their bond. Does that count against them on their excess spending? I know it counts towards the cost of their long-term average weighted daily member, but is there considerations given to these schools that have gone out and done the right things to keep their buildings in operating condition?
Yeah, fair question, member. Thank you. The way it's currently constructed is any bonds that have been taken out by voters prior to July 1st, 2024 in the current law for construction, that principal and interest is exempt from the calculation for the excess spending threshold. So that's for facilities improvements. In this new bill, it extends that to July 1st, 2026. For new projects, that's subject to the provisions in 955 and looking at new school construction and what's eligible for state aid, and also for then treatment of legacy debt. So that's all in 955, and that's I would have to defer to wherever Peter went.
I thank you very much, and I think that answer should put some people at ease. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Representative Hunter.
Just a quick one. I just noticed as I was going through the spreadsheet here that there are a couple districts, three, that are exempt from the spending threshold. I don't understand, how does that work? Thank you.
So thank you. There are two current districts which have been treated to be exempt from the excess spending threshold, and those are both interstate districts. And that has been the practice. There's some disagreement over as to if the practice is right or wrong, and something that we should probably take up in the next legislative session. Thank you for the time. I'll be here all week. Any additional questions? Yes, sorry, Kathleen. Representative James.
Thanks, Representative Kimball. I know this isn't directly related to H949, but I think that one of the most commonly misunderstood and misinterpreted pieces of our education funding formula is the CLA. And I've received a lot of questions from constituents who are, doing their own calculations. And I think anticipating CLA impacts on their property tax bills that aren't accurate. And I just wondered if you could just super simple CLA 101.
Wow.
I know you can do it.
Yeah, I might phone a friend for this as well, but the common level of appraisal, the whole approach is to make sure that everyone's property is taxed at market value. All right? Market value. And so the math to go and determine what is market value can sometimes be difficult, especially if a town has not gone through a townwide reappraisal recently. And so that is something we've addressed in 955 with trying to increase the frequency at which townwide reappraisals would be done on a regional level. And also the regional level will give larger districts the ability to include more properties in that regional assessment district that will kind of modify those spikes that you might see in particular towns. That maybe there's 3 or 4 properties that have sold at really high rates that skew the numbers. So a greater denominator of properties will help actually level out some of those really large adjustments in property value. That's first. Second is that it's always difficult when going through to try to figure out how is my CLA going to affect this, because there's 2 things. One is the homestead property tax rate is figured on the relationship between the locally voted school budget and the locally voted school budget. In the new construct, what we're doing is we're actually evening out in Act 73. We're evening out what those property tax rates are going to be across the state and be less subject to the CLA. in terms of what is voted locally, because you are receiving the education opportunity payment instead of having to vote your local budget differently. So the CLA is a very blunt instrument to try to bring all properties to market value. And it is the best option that we have right now, except it's going to be much better with regional assessment districts and more frequent townwide assessments. So when somebody's saying my CLA is killing me, well, actually, it may be that the property value, increase in property value may be what's driving that. It could be that that blunt instrument is affecting some worse than others. Julie, would you add anything to that? Okay, I got a thumbs up. I'm not sure. It can be very confusing, and I'm meeting with some constituents in Killington. Well, somebody I know. So Representative Taylor, we'll have to talk because you just got a new reassessment and folks are a little confused about how the tax bill is related to the new valuation. All things being equal, your tax rate should go down if your value goes up. All things being equal.
I think that's the main thing that's the opposite of what many folks fear.
Yes, they fear that if their property value goes up, their taxes will go up. Not necessarily true. Your tax rate should go down if your value goes up to get the same amount of tax revenue coming for the purposes of local and state government. Okay, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Madam Speaker.
All right, thank you, Representative Kimball. I understand that the Committee on Ways and Means will be doing a walkthrough on the yield bill at 2 p.m. in room 11. So if you want more details, please, that's another opportunity for you. All right, so the last bill that we will be taking up is the miscellaneous tax bill, and Representative Kornheiser will talk about that.
Hello again. So the miscellaneous tax bill is a funny one in that it's like any of your committee's miscellaneous administrative bills. There's a lot in it that's actually just quite miscellaneous and administrative and not very interesting. So I'm going to breeze through that stuff. And then it is also the mechanism that we use to link up to federal tax code. And so it is a very important piece of legislation and one of the must-pass pieces of legislation each year. When the legislation left the House, I think we had a close to unanimous vote here on it. It went over to the Senate. They made some minor changes and also had something resembling a unanimous vote. I don't remember the exact vote numbers, but just sort of so you understand the flight path of the bill. In conference, we made a few changes that were sort of updates and technical changes, and then a few more substantive pieces that I'll take you through. So in sections 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 4A and 4B and 4C and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, those were all like straight up technical administrative issues that we solved at the request of the tax department and have not changed since substantively since we were last here discussing this bill. 9 and 10 extended the health IT fund sunset by 5 years. That is unchanged between the two versions. 11 and 14 are administrative changes to language around inflators. That also was the same between the two bodies. 15 and 16 are administrative issues as well that were the same between the two bodies, also with de minimis fiscal impact. Section 17 was extending tax credits for a down payment assistance program with the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. That also was the same in both bills. Section 18 and 19 are a federal tax credit for contributions to scholarship granting organizations. When that language left the House, it was a full, essentially, prohibition on federal tax credits for contributions to scholarship granting organizations until the legislature acted, because it was important to us that we retained control over tax policy here, because that is our purview as this branch of government. When this language went over to the Senate, they instead took the tact of adding significant guardrails to this, ensuring that these scholarship granting organizations are only issuing scholarships to organizations that are making federally qualified elementary and secondary education tax credits available to Vermont taxpayers, and that the organizations that those tax credits go to are nonprofit organizations with the core mission of providing educational opportunities to economically underprivileged students through after-school programs, summer programs, tutoring, and similar. Those students need to be attending a public school or an independent school or another school capable of receiving public tuition under our existing statutes, and that those organizations do not discriminate based on race, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, place of birth, crime victim status, or age, or against a student with a disability. That's all lined up with employment law discrimination. What we did in order to meet the Senate in their really substantial narrowing of allowing this scholarship, which essentially is a federal tax workaround that allows for money to go to after-school programs and enrichment programs, summer camps, that kind of thing, for kids who might not have those opportunities otherwise. We narrowed it further by making sure that all of those qualifications are codified in a contract and memorandum of understanding between the receiving organization and your local school district, to just add extra checks and balances to make sure that all of that funding is going exactly where we want it to, and that is to meet the needs of economically disadvantaged kids attending schools that comply with all the other values of this state. So that is one significant change from the House-passed version. And then moving into sections 20 and 21 and 22 and 23. Section 21 is another sort of tax department administrative thing that did not change between the two versions. There was language around fish and wildlife fees that as the bill left the House, we essentially had in previous legislation many years ago delegated our fee authority from the legislature to the Department of Fish and Wildlife in miscellaneous tax. As it left the House, we took that delegation back from Fish and Wildlife, said that is a legislative duty. While the bill was hanging out in the Senate and they were working on it, the miscellaneous fish and wildlife bill, if anyone knows that bill number, more power to you, we were able to actually add the fee schedule from rules into statute, close a loophole, and so we made a few changes to this language to acknowledge that the fish and wildlife fees are now in statute rather than rule. So that was one change, not a big change in intent, just essentially a change in process and function. Sections 24 through 49 were all further tax department administrative issues with no changes between the two. Our 10-year tax study was the same between the two bodies. And then our link up and decoupling from federal tax laws was the same between the two bodies, except for one provision about qualified small business stocks, where we moved the effective date a year later to make sure that no one who had already sort of incurred any expenses would not be sort of taxed backwards on it, essentially, because that is not a fair form of tax policy. You want to know what the tax is that you're going to be liable for before you sort of incur any income or expenses for those. And then continuing on, we agreed on income tax apportionment, research and development tax credits. The downtown and village center tax credit we had in our construct here in the House as an increase in $1 million from $3 million. The Senate lowered that to $500,000 $100,000 increase for a total of $3.5 million for the downtown and village center tax credit. And we acceded to the Senate on that change, and that is accommodated in the budget that Representative Scheid took us through. And then there was some new language clarifying intent about the Burlington Waterfront TIF district that was agreed to by multiple stakeholders, multiple times over in multiple committees of jurisdiction, and did not actually have any statutory change impact. It was just a clarification of legislative intent. And then the very last thing is under the House construct in the bill, in order to meet the needs of our incredibly stressed transportation fund, which, as folks know, has had an ever-growing hole in meeting the needs both of the incredible employees that work at the Agency of Transportation and our need. One of the most essential functions of government is paving roads and filling potholes. The Agency of Transportation has been under a tremendous amount of stress. That fund has been under a tremendous amount of stress. I believe our chair of transportation has spoken about that many times on the floor. I'm not going to rehash it very much. In the original bill that we sent over to the Senate, we had made a move to move a percentage of purchase and use tax for FY27 into the transportation from the education fund. And we closed that hole in the education fund by moving a portion of meals and rooms tax into the education fund, and we filled that hole in the general fund with the changes we made to corporate taxes in our conformity language. In the Committee of Conference, we took the next step, which is for the following fiscal year 28, where we made that exact same transfer again to add $9.7 million more, moving of purchase and use from the education fund to the transportation fund, and filling that hole in the education fund by moving meals and rooms, some of the meals and rooms tax, into the education fund. We also added a small bit of intent language that we are interested in continuing to move purchase and use tax revenue into the transportation fund in out years, while making sure that we are not putting increased liability on property taxpayers in doing that. And that, there is a fiscal note that says all of this much better than I did, somewhere on that table, as well as posted on the House page. Thank you. Any questions? Fantastic. I'm ready for lunch too, aren't you? Oh, yes, go for it.
I waited a minute because my question is actually about 949, and I didn't know if we're allowed to go back. But I didn't have this really handy spreadsheet in front of me when that was being discussed.
We can go back, and also we're going to do another yield conversation at 2:00 in room 11.
Yeah.
So up to you. Yeah.
Well, I just wondered. There's a notable cluster in this information in Windsor County when we look at the districts that will be penalized by the excess spending threshold, and I'm wondering if anyone can explain that, what's happening there.
So I believe what the Joint Fiscal Office would say about that is that those districts are spending more money per pupil. And I'm going to go from there.
That's the easy answer.
I know. I'm going from there. I'm just saying that is the basic explanation that the Joint Fiscal Office would give you on that, and then they would keep on talking, and I will keep on talking. One piece of that we are aware of is, and we're going to keep on looking at this, is there's a lot of inter-district tuitioning that happens in that region, and that's one of the reasons that we put those tuition caps and controls in the yield bill, was to try to match those two pieces. The change in the school construction exemption for excess spending is also part of trying to meet the needs of that region. That's what we know so far, but yes, it is noticeable. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
Is it my turn?
Sorry.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. So you were talking about changes to the corporate tax structure to fill the hole in the general fund. Could you elaborate on those changes?
Oh, gosh, yeah. None of this is really changed substantively since the bill left the House. The Senate agreed to all of those things. So this is the federal link-up language. Essentially, we changed how we link up because the federal government changed how their income taxes for corporations and businesses operate. We needed to change how we connected to them, or we would have experienced a drastic revenue loss. In linking up slightly differently so that small and large businesses were treated differently, we were able to recoup some revenue from doing that. There's also a change between the federal rules that changed and how we are linking up here in something called the qualified small business stock, which is a stock that is treated slightly differently from other stocks under federal law. And then there's a few other provisions like that.
Thank you, Rep. Kornheiser. And now that we've been through all this, so just to clarify, just to make sure I understand, are there any new taxes being levied on Vermonters, or any increased tax rates or fees aside from the property tax, which obviously has to work itself out? No. Great. Thank you very much.
Hi. To go back to the representative from Williston's question, my question was how you arrived at the idea of tying the increase in tuition to the education spending as opposed to NEPA. And here's my example. If you are a tuition district
Representative Holcomb, I can barely hear you. I'm sorry.
If you are a district that spends, say, $12,000 at the elementary level and $25,000 at the tuition level, which is the case in many places and part of why some districts are struggling, a 3% increase on the 25,000 is a lot more than a 3% education spending increase on the smaller 12% at the elementary level. How is this going to lower that gap in those districts that are really struggling to protect their elementary schools?
And so our committee, which you serve on, is going to have a longer conversation about this at 2 o'clock in room 11, and we'll have lots of time to go through this. We originally proposed to the Senate to use the NEPA as an inflator, which would have been a lower inflator. We came back to deciding that it could move at the same rate of growth as other things, but mostly we wanted to, while this is not going to entirely close the alligator mouth, it is bringing it a little tighter than it was before. It is not a perfect solution. It is moving towards a better solution of bringing everyone closer and closer towards the foundation formula as we move towards that.
And I appreciate the fact that we've talked about the fact that there are many things we're still going to figure out, and I'm glad to hear you're doing that next year. The question I have is, we know that there are errors in the current funding formula, and in some cases it does actually affect who lands in the penalty box. And I'm curious if it is the intent of the body to also look at the current funding formula, because to the extent there are errors in the underlying formula, that will also affect who ends up in the excess spending penalty box. Is that something that this body is going to look at next year?
So in H955, and this is a piece that was included in the House version and agreed to in the Senate version, we are collecting the data necessary with the Agency of Education in order to understand who is weighted and where around the state, and then we'll be able to have that conversation in a way that is fulsome and data informed next year. Representative Houghton, I believe you wanted to ask a question? Oh, you did. Great. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
All right, everyone, thank you. So just a couple of reminders. The documents that have been referenced and talked about during this caucus of the whole should be or will be soon posted on the House Overview webpage. The Committee on Ways and Means will be meeting around 2 to do a deeper dive of the yield bill in room 10. Given the time, I want to make sure that members and staff have enough time for lunch, so the House can expect to be coming back into session at 1:15. And please, everyone, let's thank our amazing staff one more time.